The snow came down sideways that morning, fine and bitter. The kind of cold that didn't bite so much as it settled into the bone and stayed there. And in the middle of the square at Iron Creek, a sorry little nothing of a town wedged into the spine of the northern mountains, a woman stood chained to a post, her back turned to the crowd. She was the biggest woman any of them had ever seen. Taller than the tallest man in the territory, broad through the shoulders like a door frame. Her skin was the deep green of pine needles in deep winter, and her arms, even bound behind her, looked like they could snap the iron post she was tied to if she ever decided she'd had enough. But she didn't. She just stood there, head bowed, snow gathering on her shoulders like she was already a monument to something nobody remembered. The auctioneer was a thin man named Pell, with a voice like a rusty hinge. Step up, strong back, strong arms. She'll haul, she'll dig, she'll do the work of 3 men. He cracked a switch against the wooden platform. The woman didn't flinch. Pell's grin faltered. Come on now, look at the size of her. And that was the problem. They did look. A trapper near the front spat into the snow. Too big for the mines. She'd never fit the shafts. A woman in a fur collar sniffed. Too big for the house. Who'd want that thing standing in their kitchen? Somebody laughed. Somebody always laughs. Nobody bid. Eli Vance stood at the very back of the crowd, where the eaves of the feed store kept the worst of the snow off his hat. He was a tracker by trade, a man who'd spent more years reading the land than reading people, and he had not come here to buy anything. He'd come for salt and powder and 3 days of supplies, because the pass would close soon, and he meant to be alone in his cabin when it did. Alone was how he liked it. Alone was how he'd been since he buried his partner 2 winters back, with a bullet in his own conscience that no doctor could ever dig out. But Eli watched the woman, and Eli saw what the others didn't. He saw the way she held her weight even and ready, not slumped in defeat, but coiled, balanced. The stance of someone who had been on her feet for days and would stay on them for days more out of sheer, stubborn will. He saw the rope burns layered over older scars on her wrists, which meant she'd been bound many times and broken none of them. He saw the way the crowd's cruelty rolled off her, not because she didn't feel it, but because she'd felt it so many times that one more layer made no difference. He saw a fighter standing very, very still. And he saw something else, something that twisted in his chest in a way he hadn't felt since a riverbank in the snow 2 winters gone. He saw a person being thrown away, and Eli Vance, who had spent 2 years staying out of everybody's path so that no one else would die on his account, found that there was one thing left in the world he could not stand to watch. Last call, Pell barked. Somebody take her off my hands. I'll start the bid at $1. $1 for a beast like this. And nobody moved. The snow kept falling. The woman kept her back turned. And Eli Vance, who had not planned to open his mouth at all that day, heard his own voice cut clean across the square. $1. Heads turned. Pell's eyes lit up like a man who'd found a fool. Sold! Sold to the gentleman in the back! He said it fast, before Eli could change his mind, before anyone could outbid him with a better sense of waste. Eli pushed through the crowd, and he felt their eyes on him, felt the judgment thick as the cold. Damn fool, somebody muttered. He didn't argue. Maybe he was. He laid a silver $1 in Pell's palm, took the rope, and for the first time the woman lifted her head and looked at the man who'd bought her. Her eyes were dark, not pleading, not grateful, just measuring him, the way a hawk measures a field, looking for the trap, the cruelty, the catch that always came. Eli met that look and didn't blink. "Can you walk?" he asked. She said nothing. He cut the rope from the post anyway, left her wrists bound for now, and turned his back on her completely, which surprised her more than anything else could have. A man who buys a slave does not turn his back on her. He walked toward his horses. After a long moment, he heard her boots crunch through the snow behind him. They left Iron Creek as the light went gray. The woman walking, Eli leading the horse, neither of them speaking. The mountains rising white and silent and enormous all around them. The trail climbed. Eli kept glancing back, half expecting her to bolt, half expecting her to fall. She did neither. She kept pace with the horse on the steep grades, her breath clouding in the cold, her bound wrists held awkwardly in front of her now, and she watched everything. The trail, the trees, the man who'd bought her. She catalogued it all with the wary attention of someone memorizing an escape route. Eli noticed and said nothing, and did not blame her. Once, where the path narrowed along a drop, the horse balked at a patch of ice. Eli's boot slipped. For just a moment, he tipped backward toward the long fall, arms wheeling, and a green hand shot out and caught the front of his coat and hauled him upright as easily as a man rights a child. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen, her bound hands fisted in his coat, her face inches from his. "Careful," she said, and let go. Eli stared at her. She'd had every reason to let him fall. A dead owner is a free woman. Instead, she'd saved him without thinking, the way you'd catch anything that was falling. And the fact of it sat strangely with him the rest of the climb. Whoever this woman was, cruelty was not in her nature. Somebody had spent 3 years trying to teach it to her, and failed. The cabin sat 2 hours up a switchback trail, in a pocket of pines beside a frozen stream. By the time they reached it, the woman's lips had gone pale, and she was shivering in a way she clearly hated to show. Eli pushed open the door and built the fire fast, the way a man does when he's done it 10,000 times alone. The room filled with orange light and the smell of wood smoke. He cut the binding from her wrists with one stroke of his knife. The rope fell. She rubbed the deep purple bruises and watched him, still standing, always standing, as if sitting down would mean something she wasn't ready to mean. "Sit down," Eli said. He gestured at the bench by the fire. "You've been on your feet for days. Just sit down." She didn't move. Pride, maybe, or the long memory of every time sitting had been a command and not a kindness. Eli sighed, turned away to ladle stew from the pot he kept warm, and when he turned back, she had finally lowered herself onto the bench, slow and stiff, her great frame folding down toward the firelight. And that was when her torn shirt slipped from her shoulder. And Eli Vance saw what was underneath. There, across the curve of her shoulder blade, was a marking. Not a brand, not the crude burned letters that slavers seared into their property. This was something older, something carved with care and meaning. Intricate spiraling lines that wound up toward her neck, and someone, at some point, had tried to destroy it. Burn scars overlapped the pattern, deliberate and cruel, an attempt to erase it. But you could still read it underneath. You could still see what it had been. Eli had tracked across half the territory. He'd seen slave brands and cattle marks and the tattoos that bounty men wore. He had never seen anything like this. And the strange, careful, ruined beauty of it told him one thing for certain. Whoever this woman was, somebody had gone to a great deal of trouble to make her forget. She caught him looking. Her hand flew up to cover her shoulder, and her whole body went rigid, ready to fight, ready to run, ready for whatever came next. "Easy," Eli said. "I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to touch you." He set a bowl of stew on the bench beside her and stepped back, giving her the whole width of the room. Eat. You're no good to anybody starved, least of all yourself. She looked at the bowl. She looked at him. And after a long, suspicious moment, she ate. She ate like someone who had learned that food disappears if you don't, fast and silent, watching the door the whole time. Eli sat across the room cleaning his rifle and pretended not to notice. Outside, the snow buried the world a little deeper. When the bowl was empty, she set it down, and in a voice rough from disuse, dry as the wind, she finally spoke. Why? One word, the only one that mattered. Eli didn't look up from the rifle. Why what? Why buy me? You turned your back on me in the square. A man who means to use a thing doesn't turn his back on it. So why? Eli was quiet for a long time. The fire popped. Somewhere up the mountain, a wolf called and went unanswered. Because nobody else would, he said at last. And because I know what it is to stand somewhere with everybody looking at you like you're the worst thing they've ever seen. He finally met her eyes. You're not a thing. You're not mine. You can walk out that door come spring and I won't stop you. But the pass is closed now, so we're stuck with each other until the thaw. Might as well not freeze. She studied him for a long moment, and something in her shoulders eased, just barely. The fire settled. Outside, the wind picked up, throwing snow against the shutters in soft handfuls. Kayla sat with the empty bowl in her lap and watched the man across the room. And Eli let her watch, because he understood that trust, for someone like her, was not given. It was earned, slow, the way you tame a wild thing, by being still and patient and asking for nothing. He'd tamed enough wild things in his life to know you never reach for them. You wait. You let them reach for you, if they ever do. In their own time. You'll want to know what I am, she said finally. Everyone does. They take one look and they decide. Her voice went flat, reciting something learned by force. Too big for the mines. Too big for the house. Strong back, strong arms. Does the work of 3 men. A beast that needs reminding what it is. That's what I am. That's all I've been for 3 years. Eli set down the rifle he'd been cleaning. That's what they told you that you are, he said. It's not the same thing. A man told me once I was the kind of fool who gets good people killed. Said it right to my face. And he wasn't entirely wrong. But I'm not only that. Nobody's only the worst thing somebody ever called them. He looked at her steady. What were you before the mines? Before any of it? You remember that? And Kayla went quiet. Because that was the trouble, wasn't it? She frowned, reaching back, and her face changed, fear flickering across it. No, she said slowly. I don't. There's nothing there. Like a room with the door bricked up. I know I had a before. I can feel the shape of it, the empty space where it should be. But every time I reach for it, there's just smoke and fire. And then nothing. What kind of person can't remember their own life? Eli didn't have an answer for that. Not yet, but he filed it away with the burned mark and the fighter's stillness. One more piece of a picture he couldn't yet see the shape of. Maybe the kind, he said, that somebody worked very hard to make forget. Get some sleep, Kayla. The smoke and the fire can wait till morning. You're safe here tonight. That's all you have to know." And she studied him for one more long moment. "Kayla," she said. "What?" "My name. It's Kayla. I haven't said it out loud in 3 years." And Eli Vance nodded, slow, like a man accepting something heavy. "Welcome to the mountain, Kayla." If you're enjoying the story so far, do me a small favor and hit that subscribe button. It tells these tales they're worth telling, and it keeps Kayla's story coming. Now, back to the snow. The winter pressed down on them like a great white hand. Days bled into days, each one shorter than the last, the sun barely clearing the southern peaks before it slid away again. The snow stacked up against the cabin walls until the window was a square of blue ice. And in that forced closeness, in that small, warm room at the edge of a frozen world, the strangest thing happened. They learned each other. Eli learned that Kayla could not sit still. It was not restlessness, exactly. It was something deeper. The habit of a person who had spent her whole life being useful, because usefulness was the only thing keeping her alive. She mended the leak in the roof he'd been ignoring for a year, hauling herself up onto the beams as though her great size were nothing. She rebuilt the broken corral gate with her bare hands and a hatchet, faster and truer than he could have done it. She split a winter's worth of wood in an afternoon, the axe rising and falling in a rhythm so steady, it was almost a song. When his old hunting dog took sick, coughing and refusing food, Kayla sat up all night with the animal, she humming something low in a language Eli didn't know, a melody full of long vowels and rolling sounds. And she crushed herbs from the little pouch she carried and worked them into the dog's water. In the morning, the dog was on its feet again, tail thumping, nosing at her hand. Eli watched her with the animal and thought, that is not the way a slave moves through the world. She moved like someone who had once been responsible for many lives and had never quite shaken the habit, even after 3 years of being told she was responsible for nothing at all. And Kayla learned things about Eli, too. She learned he talked to the horses more than he talked to people, low and easy, the way a man talks to old friends. She learned that he kept a small carved horse on the mantel, the kind a man whittles for a child, and that he never touched it and never explained it, and that his eyes went somewhere far away whenever the firelight caught it. She learned that some nights he didn't sleep at all, just sat by the fire with a tin cup of something strong, staring into the coals like there was an answer hidden in them. One such night she came and sat across from him, uninvited, and said nothing, and stayed until dawn. He never thanked her. He didn't have to. There were small moments that built, the way snow builds, flake by flake, into something that can change the shape of the land. The morning Eli came in from the cold with his hands too numb to work the buttons of his coat, and Kayla, without a word, undid them for him, her huge, careful fingers gentle as a mother's. The evening she tried to teach him a word in her own tongue, and he mangled it so badly that she laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, the first he'd ever heard. He found, to his own surprise, that he would have walked a mile through the snow just to hear it again. One night, deep in the worst of the cold, Kayla spoke without being asked. "There was a man," she said, staring into the fire. "Before. The one who bought me, the first time. Not like you. He used to make me kneel before I could eat. Said a beast my size needed reminding what it was." Her jaw tightened. "I knelt, every day, for a year, because I was hungry, and because I believed him. I don't know why I'm telling you this." Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he got up, crossed the room, and set a full bowl of stew on the bench beside her, the way he had that very first night. "You don't kneel here," he said. "Not for food. Not for anything. You sit at the fire like you own it." He went back to his chair. "Because in this cabin, you do." Kayla looked at the bowl, and then at him, and something moved across her face that she didn't have a name for, because nobody had shown it to her in 3 long years. She ate sitting up straight. And after that night, something between them was different. Smaller and larger at the same time. A trust beginning to grow in frozen ground. The day everything changed, they'd gone out together to check the trap line. The snow had crusted hard enough to walk on, and the sky was a flat sheet of pewter. On the way back, 3 riders cut down off the high trail. Eli's hand went to his rifle. But these weren't slavers. They were rough men, road agents, the kind who took what they wanted in lonely country where no marshal would ever ride. They saw a lone tracker and a woman, and they saw easy work. They were wrong. "Well now," the lead rider called, grinning through a black beard. "What have we got here?" He never got to finish the thought. Kayla moved. Eli would remember it for the rest of his life. She didn't lumber. She didn't fumble. She crossed the distance between herself and the nearest horse in 3 strides, and she pulled the rider out of his saddle like a man plucking a weed, and the world dissolved into motion. A second man drew his pistol, and she was already inside his reach, her elbow finding his jaw with a crack that echoed off the mountains. The third turned his horse to run. He didn't make it 10 feet. It was over in the time it takes to draw 3 breaths. 3 men down in the snow, groaning, disarmed, utterly bewildered. And Kayla stood among them, breathing slow and even, not a scratch on her, her dark eyes calm. Eli lowered his rifle. He hadn't even needed to fire it. "Where," he said slowly, "did a slave learn to fight like that?" And Kayla went very still. Because that was the question, wasn't it? "I don't know," she said. And he could hear that it was the truth, and that the truth terrified her. "I don't remember learning. I just know. My hands know." She looked down at her own enormous hands like they belonged to a stranger. "There are years I can't find. Whole years, gone. Like someone reached into my head and burned them out the same way they burned my shoulder." Eli looked at the 3 groaning men, and at the woman who dropped them, and at the ruined marking he could just see at the edge of her collar. And a slow, cold understanding began to take shape in him. "Kayla," he said, "I don't think you were ever just a slave. I think somebody made you into one. On purpose. And I think they worked very hard to make sure you'd never remember why." They tied the 3 road agents to their own saddles and sent the horses down toward the lowlands, which was as close to mercy as the mountains allowed. And then, because there was nothing else to do until the thaw, they went home, and they began, carefully, to dig. Eli laid out what he knew like tracks in fresh snow. The marking that someone had tried to burn away. The fighting that lived in her muscles even when it had been scrubbed from her mind. The missing years. The fact that no slaver brands a body and then carves art beside the brand. Somebody had wanted Kayla erased. Not killed. Erased. There was a difference, and the difference mattered. So when the first warm wind came down off the peaks and the ice on the stream began to crack and sing, Eli made a decision. "There's a man," he said over breakfast, "down in the valley, old Métis trader named Bordeaux. Knows every tribe, every mark, every story between here and the Canadian line. If your marking means anything to anybody, it means something to him. We go when the pass opens. Together, if you want to know. Kayla's hands tightened around her cup. And if I don't like what I find? Then you don't like it, Eli said. But you'll know. And knowing is better than the hole somebody dug in your head and left you standing in. He held her gaze. You decide. Always you. She was quiet for a long while. Then she nodded. We go. The valley town of St. Pierre was 3 days down the mountain, a muddy sprawl of trading posts and missions, where a dozen languages braided together in the streets. Bordeaux kept a shop at the end of the boardwalk, crammed floor to rafter with pelts and beads, and the accumulated debris of 40 years on the frontier. He was ancient, bent like a question mark, with eyes that had gone milky but missed nothing. When Kayla ducked through his low doorway and the firelight caught her shoulder, the old man dropped the cup he was holding. It shattered on the floor. It cannot be, he whispered. And then, to the astonishment of them both, the old trader lowered himself down, knee by aching knee, onto the floor of his own shop. It cannot be. But it is. Get up, Kayla said, alarmed. Old man, what are you doing? Bordeaux looked up at her, with tears standing in his cloudy eyes. That mark on your shoulder, child. Do you know what it is? Do you truly not know? He reached up with one trembling, spotted hand. That is the mark of the High Stone clan, the mountain clan of the far north. It is given to one person and one only in each generation. It is the mark of the chieftain's heir. You are no slave, child. You are the daughter of a queen. The shop went utterly silent. Kayla stood frozen, her great frame trembling now in a way that no cold had ever caused. No, she said. No, that's not. I haul, I dig, I do the work of 3 men. They told me what I was. They told me 100 times. They lied to you, child, Bordeaux said. They lied to you so completely that you came to wear the lie like a skin. Sit, please, and let an old man tell you who you really are. And so, in a cramped trading post that smelled of cedar and old leather, Kayla learned her own history from the mouth of a stranger. The Highstone clan had held the northern peaks for longer than the white men had names for them. Theirs was not a kingdom of gold, but of high passes and clean water and good hunting, and the right to it was sacred, recognized even in the brittle new treaties the territorial government signed and broke and signed again. The clan was led by a chieftain, and the chieftain's heir was marked at birth with the spiraling high stone sigil, painted first and then made permanent so that no one could ever doubt the bloodline. To bear the mark was not a privilege, it was a duty. The marked one belonged to the people more than the people belonged to her. She was the living proof that the valley had an owner, and the valley's owner had a name, and the name went back 1,000 years into the rock of the mountains themselves. Kayla had been that heir, but there had been a man, a cattle baron named Silas Crane, who had looked at the High Stone Valley and seen not a sacred home, but acres, water rights, grazing land worth a fortune. He'd come first with offers, Bordeaux said, generous ones. The clan had refused, as they had refused every such offer for generations, because you cannot sell what was never yours alone to sell. Crane did not take refusal well. The only thing standing between him and that fortune was the clan's legal claim. And the only thing keeping the claim alive was the unbroken bloodline. The heir. So Crane had not simply attacked. A massacre would have brought the marshals, the newspapers, the inconvenient eyes of the law. Crane was cleverer than that. He came back to the valley wearing the face of a friend. He brought gifts. He proposed a great feast to mark a new peace between the clan and the cattlemen. And the chieftain, who wanted peace for her people more than she wanted to live forever, agreed. The feast was poisoned. Not all at once. Slowly, over the course of the night, so that by the time anyone understood, it was already too late, and the clan that had held the mountains for 1,000 years was dying in its own great hall, betrayed by its own open hand. Crane scattered the survivors into the dark, and the young heir, the marked daughter, he did not kill. A dead heir becomes a martyr, and a martyr's claim can be inherited, taken up by a cousin, a counsel, a memory. But a living heir who does not know she is the heir, who believes herself a beast, a thing, a slave too big to be of any use, she inherits nothing. She fights for nothing. She simply disappears into the great grinding machine of the frontier and is never heard from again. It was not mercy. It was the cruelest thing Crane could have done, and he did it on purpose, because a living forgotten heir was worth a valley to him, and a dead, remembered one was worth nothing. So Crane's men had burned the mark from her shoulder, badly, on purpose. And they had done something worse to her mind, some cruelty Bordeaux only half understood. And they had sold her south under a false name. And for 3 years it had worked. For 3 years, Kayla had been exactly what they made her. When Bordeaux finished, the shop was dark. Kayla sat very still, and Eli sat beside her, and neither of them spoke for a long time. "The valley," Kayla said at last, her voice low and strange. "My valley. Where is it now?" Bordeaux's face fell. "Crane holds it, has for 3 years. He could not get clear legal title while there was any chance the heir lived, so he has held it by force, by hired guns, daring anyone to challenge him. But the law moves. There's a territorial judge coming through this spring to settle the old claims for good, and if no Highstone heir comes forward to contest it," he spread his hands, "then Crane's title becomes real, forever, and everything your people died for becomes his." Eli felt the change in the room before Kayla spoke. He felt the air go tight. He looked at her, and the woman who'd stood with her back turned in the snow at Iron Creek was gone. In her place sat someone who had just remembered, in the space of a single hour, exactly what had been taken from her. "When does the judge arrive?" Kayla asked. Bordeaux swallowed. 3 weeks, at the territorial seat. But child, you must understand. The moment Crane learns you're alive, he will not let a judge decide anything. He has spent 3 years and a fortune making sure you stayed buried. He will bury you for good rather than lose that valley. Kayla stood. Her head nearly brushed the rafters. "Then he can try," she said. "I have been small for 3 years, old man. I have been exactly the size they wanted me to be. I'm done being small." Before we ride down into that valley with Kayla, let me ask you something. If you've ever felt like the world tried to make you smaller than you were born to be, this next part is for you. Hit subscribe and stay with her to the end, because what Kayla does next is the reason I wanted to tell this story at all. Now, let's go take back a kingdom. They didn't have 3 weeks to waste, and they both knew it. The moment word spread that a woman bearing the Highstone mark had walked into Bordeaux's shop, Crane would hear of it. The frontier was vast, but gossip rode fast horses. So they moved fast. Bordeaux gave them names. Scattered survivors of the clan, the ones who'd run far enough to live, hiding in a half-dozen lonely places across the territory. An old warrior named Torek, who'd carried the infant heir out of the burning camp, and lived every day since in shame that he hadn't done more. A handful of others. They were not many, but they were the last of the High Stone, and Kayla meant to find them. Eli could have turned back. This was not his fight. He'd bought a strong back to survive a winter, and instead he'd found a deposed queen with an army's worth of enemies. Any sensible man would have wished her well and ridden home. Eli was not, it turned out, a sensible man. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. The night before they rode out to find the survivors, Kayla asked him about the carved horse on the mantel. She'd wanted to ask all winter. She finally did. Eli was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I had a partner, Tom. We trapped and tracked together for 11 years, closer than brothers. He had a little girl, Sarah. I carved her that horse the winter she was 4. His voice went rough. There was a job, a bounty north of here. Tom said it was too risky. I said the money was too good. I talked him into it. He died on a riverbank in the snow, with my name on his lips, asking me why. And I rode back alone, and put that little horse on my mantle, and I never carved another thing in my life. Sarah grew up without a father because I wanted money. That's the ghost in this cabin, Kayla. That's why I stay out of the way. Every time I've stepped into someone's path, somebody good has died for it." Kayla listened to all of it without moving. Then she said, very quietly, "And yet you stepped into mine. In the square at Iron Creek. You bid $1 when every voice in you must have been screaming to walk away." Eli looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "I did." "Then maybe," Kayla said, "you're not the man who gets people killed. Maybe you're the man who couldn't watch one more person be thrown away. Those are not the same man, Eli. You've just been confusing them for 2 long years." Eli didn't answer, but something in his chest, frozen since a riverbank in the snow, cracked very slightly. And for the first time in a long time, he let it. They found Torek first, in a sod hut on the edge of the Badlands. The old warrior was grey and stooped, a shadow of whatever he'd been, and when he opened his door and saw Kayla standing there with the mountains at her back, his legs gave out beneath him. He wept. He had carried her as a baby through fire and smoke, and he had spent 3 years believing she was dead, and her death his fault. "You're alive," he kept saying. "You're alive. The blood lives. The blood lives." Kayla knelt and took the old man's hands. "I am alive," she said, "and I'm going home. Will you come with me?" Torek looked up at her, and something old and fierce came back into his ruined face. "I failed you once," he said. "I will not fail you twice. I will come, and I will bring the others." Over the next 2 weeks they gathered, one by one in lonely places. The last of the High Stone clan came out of hiding, drawn by the impossible word that their heir lived. They found Mara in a mission town, where she'd been working as a midwife under a false name, hiding her mark beneath high collars for 3 years. She was a healer with steady hands and steadier eyes, and when she saw Kayla, she did not weep like Torek had. She simply set down her bag, looked at the mark on Kayla's shoulder for a long moment, and said, "I delivered you. I was barely more than a girl, but I was in the birthing tent. I watched them paint the sigil on your skin while you screamed your first scream. I never thought I'd see it again. Where do you need me?" They found the brothers Goss and Wren working a cattle ranch 200 miles south, breaking horses for a wage that barely fed them. They'd been boys during the massacre, hidden under a wagon by a mother who didn't survive, and they were boys no longer. Goss was all shoulders and silence. Wren talked enough for both of them. When Kayla found them in the corral and Goss saw her face, the big, quiet brother dropped to one knee in the mud without a word, and Wren, for once in his life, had nothing to say at all. There was old Henna, who'd kept the clan's songs in her memory because she'd had nothing else to keep. There was a scarred man named Dove, who'd lost an eye in the massacre and an arm in the years since, and who could still, he promised grimly, shoot straighter with one eye than most men could with two. There were 9 of them in all, when they finally counted, 11 counting Kayla and Eli. 9 survivors against a cattle baron with 30 hired guns and a valley full of fences. The math was not good. Eli, who'd spent his life calculating exactly this kind of math, knew it was not good. But there's a kind of arithmetic that doesn't show up in numbers. He watched it happen around the campfire each night, watched the way the survivors looked at Kayla, watched her grow into something she had not been when he'd cut her ropes. She was learning to be what she'd been born to be. When Wren argued, she listened. When Goss grieved, she sat with him. When Henna sang the old songs in the dark, Kayla closed her eyes, and Eli watched the words come back to her, watched her lips begin to shape sounds she had no memory of learning, watched 3 burned-out years begin, slowly, to fill back in. And the old warrior, Torek, was teaching her the things Crane had tried to burn away. The history, the names of her grandmothers, the strategy of the high passes, where 10 could hold a trail against 100. The reason the High Stone had held their mountains for 1,000 years against every comer. "You were not born to haul and dig," he told her one night, fierce and low. "You were born to lead a free people in a free valley. They could burn the mark from your skin. They could not burn it from your blood. And here you are. Here you are." One night, late, when the others slept, Kayla found Eli sitting watch at the edge of the firelight. She lowered herself down beside him, that great frame folding to the ground. And for a while, they just watched the dark together. "You could leave," she said. "This isn't your war. I bought a winter's labor from you, and now I'm dragging you toward 30 guns. Nobody would think less of you." Eli was quiet. "You didn't buy anything," he said finally. "I bought you. $1, remember?" A faint, dry smile. "Worst dollar I ever spent. Or the best. Can't tell yet." Kayla almost laughed. Then her face went serious. "When this is over, if I'm still alive, I'll have a valley, a clan, a whole life I never got to live." She looked at him. "Where do you fit in that, Eli Vance? A tracker with a dead partner and a cabin full of ghosts. What happens to you when the Queen goes home?" It was the most either of them had ever said out loud. Eli looked into the fire for a long time. "I stopped thinking about what happens to me a long time ago," he said. "After I buried Tom, I figured the best I could do was stay out of the way, not make any more graves." He looked at her. Then I bought a woman everybody said was useless, and watched her turn out to be the bravest thing I ever saw. And somewhere in there, I started thinking about Happens again. I don't know where I fit, Kayla, but I'd like the chance to find out. If you'll let me stand beside you when it counts. Kayla reached over, and her enormous hand covered his. Stand beside me, she said. Not in front, not behind. Beside. As an equal. That's the only place I'll ever let anyone stand again. Beside you, Eli agreed. And the fire burned low, and the mountains kept their silence, and the war they were riding toward waited just over the horizon. They reached the territorial seat the day before the judge was due. It was a real town by frontier standards, with a courthouse and a telegraph and a main street long enough to be called one. And it was already crawling with Silas Crane's men. Crane had heard. Of course he had. Bordeaux had been right about the speed of gossip. The cattle baron had ridden in 2 days earlier with a small army of hired guns, and he'd taken over the best rooms in the only hotel, and he'd let it be known, quietly, that anyone who came to contest his claim on the High Stone Valley would not enjoy the experience. The judge, a tired old man named Hollis, was due at noon the next day. Whoever held the floor when Hollis banged his gavel would likely hold that valley forever. Kayla wanted to ride straight into the square. Torek talked her out of it. You walk in alone. He has you shot in the street and calls it self-defense, the old warrior said. Then there is no heir, and the valley is his, and we have lost everything to your pride. We are 9. He is 30. We do not win this with strength. We win it with the thing he never expected. We win it by surviving until noon. We win it in front of the judge, in front of witnesses, where even Crane cannot simply make you disappear. Until then, we stay hidden, and we stay alive. It was good counsel, and Kayla took it, though it cost her. They holed up in a livery stable on the edge of town, owned by a sympathetic old widow who owed Bordeaux a favor. And they waited, and they planned, and they tried to ignore the fact that somewhere in that town, a man with 30 guns was hunting them. The trouble came at midnight, the way trouble does. One of Crane's men, a tracker nearly as good as Eli, found the stable. Eli heard him first. The faint, wrong sound of a boot on gravel where no boot should be. He came awake with his pistol already in his hand. Up, he hissed. Up, all of you. They're here. What followed was not a battle. A battle is loud. This was worse. This was the dark and whispers and the cold knowledge that the men outside meant to set the stable afire and shoot down anyone who ran from the flames. It was exactly the kind of quiet erasure Crane preferred. No witnesses, no bodies anyone would find. Just a fire and a tragedy, and a valley that belonged to him by morning. Eli moved through the dark stable, waking each of them with a hand over the mouth and a whisper in the ear. Don't light a lamp. Don't make a sound. There's men outside and they mean to burn us. He felt the survivors come awake around him, felt the air change as 9 people who had survived the unsurvivable understood, all at once, that it had found them again. Nobody panicked. That was the thing he'd remember. These were not people who panicked anymore. They had used up a lifetime's worth of panic in a single poisoned night 3 years before. And what was left was something colder and harder, and far more dangerous. Kayla found him in the dark. How many? 8, I think. Spread out. They've got the doors covered front and back. They want us to run into the open. Kayla was silent for a moment. Then we don't run into the open. We go through them in the dark, where being big doesn't matter and being 8 doesn't help. And we take their guns before they know we're coming. Torek, Dove, the back door. Goss, Ren, with me at the front. Mara, the wounded and the lamps stay dark in the center. Nobody fires until I do. She put her huge hand flat against Eli's chest. You stay near me. But Crane had made one mistake. He'd sent 8 men to do murder, and he'd sent them against the last warriors of the Highstone clan, in the dark, on the night before they'd lost everything to lose. These were not soft people. These were the ones who had survived the unsurvivable. And he had cornered them. There is nothing on God's earth more dangerous than people with nothing left to lose, fighting in defense of the one thing they thought was already gone. Eli would never be able to fully describe that fight. It happened in fragments, in muzzle flashes and the screams of horses and the smell of smoke when the first torch hit the hayloft. He remembered the door bursting in and a man's silhouette against the snow, and then the silhouette folding as Dove's single eye found its mark in the dark. He remembered Torek, old and slow, taking a bullet meant for Kayla and still managing to put his attacker down before he fell. He remembered Mara dragging the wounded clear of the spreading flames with one hand while she fought with the other. He remembered Ren shouting something in the old tongue, a war cry 1,000 years old, and the brothers moving together like they'd never been apart. He remembered Kayla. He remembered Kayla most of all. She moved through that burning chaos like a force of nature finally unleashed after 3 years of chains. She was everywhere. She pulled a man off Goss before his knife could land. She caught a torch in midair and flung it back into the face of the man who'd thrown it. She fought not with the desperate fury of someone afraid to die, but with the cold, terrible focus of someone who had finally remembered exactly what she was protecting. Every blow she struck was a year of being made small, given back. Every man who fell before her was a lie she was burning out of her own bones. And one by one, Crane's 8 men learned the same lesson the road agents had learned in the snow. They had badly, fatally, misjudged the size of the thing they were fighting. But Eli took a bullet, high in the chest, just under the shoulder, spun him into the stable wall, and the world went white and then red, and then very far away. Eli! He heard Kayla's voice from somewhere above him, and he heard the fight change, heard it become something else, something with no mercy left in it at all. And then he didn't hear anything for a while. When Eli came back to himself, the fire was out. The stable was a ruin of smoke and ash, but it stood. The widow was pouring water. Mara's hands were pressed to his shoulder, and the pain told him he was alive, because the dead don't hurt like that. And Kayla was kneeling over him, her face streaked with soot and blood, none of it hers, her dark eyes wide with something he'd never seen in them before. Fear. Fear for him. Stay with me, she said. Eli Vance, don't you dare. You said beside me. You don't get to leave before noon. Eli managed to smile. Wouldn't dream of it, he rasped. Did we win? Kayla looked around at the wreckage, at the survivors, at the bodies of Crane's men. We're alive, she said. Most of us. Her voice caught. Torek was gone. The old warrior who'd carried her out of one fire had given his life in another, and his last sight had been the air he'd saved, standing tall and unbroken. He died smiling, Kayla whispered. He said the blood lives. And then he was gone. Eli reached up with his good hand and found hers. Then the blood lives, he said. And you go finish it. For him. For all of them. Go be what they died for. Outside, the sky was going gray with dawn. In 6 hours, the judge would bang his gavel, and Silas Crane did not yet know that the 8 men he'd sent into the dark were never coming back. Noon came hot and bright. The whole town crowded into and around the little courthouse, because word had spread of gunfire in the night, and frontier towns can smell a reckoning the way animals smell a storm. Silas Crane sat at the front, expensive and confident, surrounded by the lawyers money could buy and the guns money could rent. He'd heard by now that something had gone wrong at the stable, but he didn't know how wrong. He still believed the heir was a rumor, a ghost, a problem his men had surely solved in the dark. He had his deed, he had his witnesses, paid and rehearsed. He had every reason to believe the High Stone Valley was about to become legally, permanently, irrevocably his. Judge Hollis settled behind the bench, mopped his brow, and called the matter. The claim on the northern parcel known as the High Stone Valley. Mr. Crane has petitioned for clear title, citing abandonment and the absence of any surviving claimant. He peered out over his spectacles. Is there anyone present who contests this petition? Anyone with a lawful claim to the High Stone Valley? He asked it the way a man asks a question he expects no answer to. Speak now, or the matter is settled. For a moment, silence. Crane's mouth curved into the beginning of a smile, and then the doors at the back of the courthouse swung open, and Kayla walked in. She did not hurry. She came down the center aisle with the morning light behind her, and she had to duck slightly to clear the doorway, and every head in that packed room turned to watch the biggest woman any of them had ever seen walk to the front and stop before the bench. She had torn the shoulder of her shirt away, and there, for the whole town to see, was the high stone mark, the spiraling sigil, scarred, half-burned, and unmistakable. Silas Crane's smile died on his face. He came half out of his chair. That's impossible, he breathed, and the whole room heard him, and the whole room understood in that single whispered word that the impossible thing was true. My name is Kayla of the High Stone clan, she said, and her voice filled the courtroom to the rafters. Daughter of the chieftain, marked heir of the northern peaks. I contest this petition. The valley was never abandoned. Its people were murdered by that man. She did not point. She didn't need to. Every eye was already on Crane. What followed was not quick. The law never is. There were objections and recesses, and Crane's lawyers shouting about fraud and imposters, demanding proof, insisting the mark could be a forgery, a fake, a clever scar drawn by an opportunist who'd heard of the Lost Valley and seen a chance. But Kayla had Bordeaux. The old trader was helped to the witness stand, and he spoke for an hour, his cracked voice carrying through the silent room. He described the high stone sigil in detail no forger could have known. The 7 inner spirals, the way the lines turned at the shoulder blade, the meaning of each curve. He had Kayla turn so the judge could see, and he traced the ruined pattern in the air without touching her, naming each part, and the match was exact. I have traded with 30 tribes for 40 years, he said. I have seen this mark exactly twice. Once on the old chieftain, may she rest, and once now on her daughter. There is no third. There cannot be. It is not a thing you fake. It is a thing you are born with, or you are not." She had Mara, who told the judge she had been present at the birth, and described the camp and the night, and named names of the dead that matched the territorial records of the people who'd vanished 3 years before. She had Goss and Wren, who told of hiding under a wagon while their mother died above them. She had Dov, one-eyed and one-armed, who described the poison and the fire in a flat, steady voice that no rehearsal could have produced, because grief like that cannot be performed, only survived. And against this, Crane had hired witnesses, men in clean coats who swore the valley had been empty when Crane found it, abandoned, free for the taking. But Eli had spent his life reading men, and so had the judge, and the hired witnesses could not keep their stories straight. One said the valley was empty in spring, another said autumn. A third, pressed hard by Bordeaux's questions, went pale and silent, and finally would not answer at all. She had the bodies of the men Crane had sent to kill her in the night, laid out now for the marshals to see, and the widow who'd watched them come and try to burn a stable full of sleeping people. And she had Eli Vance, pale and bandaged but upright, who testified to the burn scars on her shoulder, the deliberate cruelty of them, and the fight in the dark that Crane's own men had started. And she had something Crane could not buy, or burn, or bury. She had the truth, standing 7 feet tall in the center of the room, refusing to be small. In the end, even Judge Hollis, who had seen every kind of frontier swindle in 30 years on the bench, could not look away from it. He heard Crane's hired witnesses contradict each other and crumble. He heard the survivors speak with a grief that could not be rehearsed. And he looked, for a long time, at the ruined, sacred mark on Kayla's shoulder, at the deliberate cruelty of those burn scars, at the way someone had tried to erase a birthright with fire and failed. Nobody scars away a birthright by accident. Nobody fakes a wound like that to gain a valley. You only do that to a person to take something from them. And the judge, old and tired and honest, understood at last exactly what had been taken, and from whom, and by whom. Crane saw it slipping. He'd come into that courtroom certain of victory, a rich man surrounded by paid men, holding a deed he'd murdered a clan to obtain. And now he watched it all come apart in front of a tired old judge, watched his hired witnesses crumble, watched the impossible dead air stand alive and marked and unbreakable in the center of the room, naming his crimes one by one to a town that was beginning, visibly, to believe her. He had spent 3 years and a fortune building a lie, and the lie was dying in front of him. And Silas Crane was not a man who knew how to lose. And Crane, like all such men, had one last card. When the law turns against you, when the words stop working, there's always the gun. His hand moved toward his coat. But Eli Vance had been watching Crane's hands the entire time, the way a tracker watches everything. And Eli's voice cracked across the courtroom like a whip. "Judge, he's reaching!" And then it happened, very fast. Crane drew. The courtroom erupted in screaming and scrambling, but Kayla was already moving, that impossible speed, and she crossed the space between them before the pistol cleared his coat, and she closed her enormous hand over his, over the gun, over everything. And she held him there, perfectly still, perfectly helpless, in front of the judge and the whole town and the law itself. She did not crush his hand, though Eli saw that she could have. She did not kill him, though every soul in that clan would have understood. She leaned down close to his ear, and in a voice only Crane could hear, she said something. Eli never learned what. but he watched the color drain entirely from Silas Crane's face, watched the man who'd murdered a clan and stolen a kingdom go white and small and afraid, until at last he understood what it felt like to be the small one in the room. Then she opened her hand, and Crane's pistol clattered to the floor, and the marshals who'd been summoned at dawn took him by both arms. "Silas Crane," Judge Hollis said, and his voice shook with an old man's fury. "You are bound over for murder, fraud, and attempted murder in my own courtroom." He brought down his gavel like a thunderclap. "And the High Stone Valley is restored, in full, to its lawful heir, Kayla of the High Stone clan. By the authority of this court, and God willing, forever." The room erupted, and Kayla of the High Stone clan stood in the center of it, tall and scarred, and finally, home. They buried Torek in the valley he'd died to protect, on a green slope above the clean water, where the wind came down off the high peaks and sang the old songs, whether anyone was there to hear them or not. Henna sang him down, the full death song of the High Stone, all 7 verses, the first time it had been sung in the valley in 3 years. Kayla stood at the head of the grave with the survivors gathered behind her, and she did not cry until the last verse. And then she let herself, because a queen is allowed to grieve the man who carried her out of fire as a baby and back into the light as a woman. "The blood lives," she said over the grave, the words he'd wept the day she found him. "You kept it alive, old friend. Now rest." The survivors began, slowly, to rebuild. They cleared Crane's fences. They tore down the cattle pens and let the valley breathe again. Word spread, the way it does, and over the following months others came, scattered High Stone folk who'd hidden their marks and forgotten their songs, drawn home by the impossible news that the blood lived and the valley was free. They came in 2s and 3s, footsore and weary, and Kayla met every one of them at the valley's mouth herself and welcomed them home with her own hands. By the first snow, there were 60 of them. By the second spring, 200. The High Stone clan, which a clever, cruel man had tried to erase from the earth, was not erased. It was only scattered. And scattered things, it turns out, can be gathered again. Eli's shoulder healed slow, but it healed. He made himself useful through the rebuilding the way he knew how, tracking strays and reading the land and teaching the young ones to hunt. But he kept himself at the edges, the way he always had, a quiet man with a cabin full of ghosts, who did not quite believe he belonged at the center of anyone's life. He'd meant to leave at first, told himself the Queen had a kingdom now and a clan, and no further use for a broken tracker. He even saddled his horse, one grey morning before the others woke, and pointed it toward the pass. Kayla found him at the gate. "Going somewhere?" she asked. Eli wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "Figured you've got everything you need now. Didn't want to be the ghost hanging around the edges of it." Kayla was silent for a moment. Then she reached out and took the reins from his hand, gentle but absolute, and she looped them back over the post. "I told you once," she said, "that I'd only let a person stand beside me, as an equal. Do you remember?" "I remember." "I have a valley now, Eli, a clan, a whole life that man tried to burn out of me, and didn't." She stepped closer, that great frame, that fierce, gentle face. "And I would trade all of it, every acre, before I'd let you ride out that gate believing you were a ghost. You bought a woman everybody called useless, for $1. And you turned your back on her because you trusted her to follow. Stand beside me, Eli Vance. Not as a tracker I hired, as the man who saw what was underneath, when everyone else only saw a thing too big to want. Eli looked at her for a long moment, at this impossible woman who'd walked into his life chained to a post in a frozen square and somehow become the truest thing in it. At the queen who could have anything, anyone, a whole valley full of people who would gladly stand at her side, and who was asking instead for him. A broken tracker with a carved horse on a mantle and 2 years of silence in his chest. And then, slowly, he stepped down off his horse. "Besides you," he said. "I think I can manage that." Kayla smiled, and it was a thing worth the whole long winter to see. "On one condition," she said. "Name it. You never call me too big again. I spent 3 years being made small to fit inside somebody else's plans. I am exactly the size I was born to be. Exactly the size they were afraid of." And Eli Vance laughed. A real laugh. The first true one in 2 long years. A sound that came up from somewhere he'd thought had frozen solid forever. "Deal," he said. "Exactly the right size. Every inch of you." He pulled her close, and she came, that enormous, gentle strength folding around him, and they stood together at the gate of the valley, while the wind came down off the white peaks, and the old songs rose to meet it. In the square at Iron Creek, a lifetime ago, a man had paid $1 silver for a woman everyone said was worthless, too big to be of any use, and he'd turned his back and walked away, trusting her to follow. And she had, all the way home, all the way to a throne they'd tried to burn out of her bones. Some things, it turns out, are too big to erase. Some marks run deeper than the scars laid over them, and some people are exactly the size they were always meant to be. Thank you for staying until the end of Kayla's story. If it moved you, if you felt even a little of what she felt standing in that courtroom refusing to be small, then do me one last favor. Subscribe and let me know in the comments, because there are more stories like this one waiting in the mountains, and I'd love for you to be here when I tell them. Until then, stay warm, and never let anyone make you smaller than you were born to be.